Welcome to this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 2 walkthrough on work, poverty and welfare. In this video we're going to look at a 10-mark outline and explain question on welfare provision and poverty. On paper 2 of the AQA A-Level Sociology, the paper that deals with the different options that students study, there is a specific type of outline and explain question that only appears on this paper. It reflects how a factor from one part of the specification will impact on another part of the specification, and students need to make the links between two things that they are not usually taught together. In order to answer the question, students need to come up with two extended paragraphs, each of which should look at a specific way or reason why one factor has impacted on the other. This question, unlike the 10-mark apply and analyse question on the same paper, requires students to just analyse the explanation. Whilst some evaluation can be presented as a form of analysis, essentially students are looking to explain why this happens. Now in this video we're going to look at outlining and explaining two ways that welfare provision may shape patterns of poverty. This links information from the specification point on government solutions to poverty and applies it to the social distribution of poverty, that is by class, gender, ethnicity, disability, family structure and age. What students need to do is to be able to explain the impacts of welfare on these different groups that experience poverty. And they may want to look at different specific policies or theoretical approaches. Now, when we're looking at how we link the cause to the effect, our question is focusing on how welfare impacts on patterns of poverty. So we may start with looking at the poverty trap and or dependency culture. This links into new right explanations of poverty, particularly those put forward by the likes of Murray and Marsland. They would suggest that welfare provides disincentives to work and can create an underclass, and students should be able to go through the process of how this happens to show that welfare can create an underclass, and this explains one of the patterns of poverty. A second explanation could be the impacts on different social groups. Now this can be explored in several different ways. We could talk about the impact of austerity cuts on disability and poverty. We could talk about welfare policies such as the triple lock and how it impacts on age and poverty. We could also talk about cuts to child benefit or the two-child cap and how that impacts on child poverty. What we're going to focus on is how welfare may fail to meet the needs of lone parents, and this looks at the intersections usually of female poverty and also family structure. We can talk about some of the impacts of universal credit, particularly how it disadvantages women who are looking to go back into work and have childcare responsibilities, and how this impacts disproportionately on women and shows us how women are more likely to appear in statistics on poverty. Let's look at a sample response then. One way welfare provision may shape patterns of poverty is through the design and conditionality of benefits, which can create disincentives to work and maintain individuals in poverty. What the student has done is identified a way in which welfare provision can impact on poverty. But what they also need to do is to develop this by doing a logical chain of reasoning. This comes with the second line. The concept of the poverty trap refers to situations where people are financially worse off if they move into low-paid work because of the loss of welfare benefits such as housing support or universal credit. We need to develop this a little bit further. This effect is particularly pronounced when the transition into work does not cover living costs or childcare, which discourages people from leaving benefits. Now there are two ways in which we could develop this further. We could take the new right view, that benefits should be cut to act as an incentive to go into work, or we could take the social democratic view. The idea is that we need to build in a safety net for people who are transitioning into work from benefits and taper benefits down based upon how much people earn. This student has taken the new right approach by stating that Murray argues that overly generous or easily accessed benefits can encourage a culture of dependency where individuals and families become reliant on state support instead of seeking employment. So what the student has done is talked about how benefits can impact on levels of poverty. They've also brought in a theory to kind of back up their ideas and help with their analysis. What they now need to do is to link it to a specific pattern of poverty. Murray believes that this leads to the formation of an underclass with a lack of motivation and weakened family structures, particularly in inner city areas. Welfare, in this view, maintains poverty because it removes the incentives needed for self-sufficiency and using work to escape poverty. So you can see here the student has linked this to patterns of poverty, how it maintains poverty. Benefits maintain poverty according to the new right. Now, if this were a larger 20-mark essay, we could quite easily criticise this viewpoint by contrasting it with a social democratic view, or with points such as the new right take a victim-blaming approach that ignores structural issues. If we move on to our second response, a second way welfare provision may shape patterns of poverty is through how it impacts different social groups unequally. The student straight away has put in feminist sociologists argue that welfare systems often fail to meet the needs of women, especially single mothers. So they're focusing very quickly on how welfare impacts on patterns of poverty and focusing on gender. This is backed up not only with an example but some research. Leonard has suggested that the design of the benefit system is based on outdated assumptions about the male breadwinner role, which ignores women's dual role in paid work and unpaid care. Women may find it difficult to work full-time due to childcare responsibilities, but benefit rules may still penalise them. Now, the student could develop this a little bit further by using some examples of the way in which women are penalised for going into work. They could develop it by talking about the costs of childcare and how childcare costs aren't met through benefits. Alternatively, they could have evaluated, if it was a larger question, by talking about things like working tax credits that provided help with childcare costs. But in order to develop their analysis, they've looked at more research. This is a useful way of showing sophisticated knowledge and understanding of the issue by using more than one piece of research. Additionally, research by Kenway and Palmer shows that welfare reforms such as universal credit have had disproportionate negative effects on women and minority ethnic groups, increasing their risk of falling below the poverty line. So while the student is focused on patterns of poverty in terms of gender, they've also brought in the intersection with minority ethnic groups as well, which shows really sophisticated knowledge. To tie it all together, a simple sentence that says, this demonstrates how welfare provision often fails to inadequately tackle wider structural issues such as social expectations and leads to the persistence of poverty amongst marginalised groups. And before we go, just some exam gold. If you do take an intersectional approach, this can be used to demonstrate a very sophisticated knowledge of how marginalised groups are often subjected to multiple forms of disadvantage. We could have developed this in our first point where we were talking about lone parents and how it disadvantages not only women but also could potentially disadvantage people based upon their family structure. And this would be a very sophisticated way to tackle a question of this type. That concludes this Tutor to You AQA A-Level Sociology Paper 2 walkthrough video, looking at the 10-mark outline and explain question on welfare, provision and poverty. Thanks for watching.